Batteries. This is just a glimpse into the battery situation in our house. We've got a wide variety of standard and rechargeable batteries that have devolved into this disorganized mess. It's hard to know what we're running low on, what we've run out of, and our battery charger, we can't seem to find a dedicated home for it. So what we're aiming to do with our battery station here today is to build something to keep the batteries organized, both standard and rechargeables, and give us a dedicated home for the battery charger and other extra non-standard batteries and battery testers and any other battery stuff. Now the first step is to lay out and measure up all the different types of batteries that we'll be storing. The D batteries are the largest, so we'll use those to set the maximum depth of each compartment. And then we'll measure up each battery type after that. Now I've marked out the lengths of all the different batteries here so I can determine how much of a spacer I need to put behind each of them so the compartments are the proper depth. Now if you'd like to save yourself the effort of going through all the design process here, I will have a complete set of PDF plans for sale on my website. So check out the link here or down in the description. Now we've probably got more rechargeable D batteries than we'll ever use, but I want to make sure they fit in the battery station. So we'll stack them up and see we need about 12 inches in height to hold all of these batteries. We're going to separate each stack of batteries with a strip of 1/4 inch plywood. Since we have 5 types of batteries and 2 stacks for each, we've got 10 compartments to fill, so we'll need 9 of these dividers. So I cut down this 1/4 inch plywood into a 12 inch strip for the 12 inches of height, and then ripped that down into 9 separate pieces to go between each battery compartment. The 2 outside ends of the battery station will be the same size as all the dividers, but we'll cut those from 1/2 inch thick plywood for extra strength on the outside. Now we'll need a space for our fingers to reach in and actually grab the batteries from the bottom of each stack. So we'll cut a notch out of all of these pieces. So taking the 2 end pieces and the 9 dividers, we'll stack those up, wrap them up with some tape to keep them together, and we'll run them through the bandsaw to cut out that corner so that they all match. After a little sanding to clean up these pieces, we can move on to the spacers. To come up with the width of each section, I take a battery, place it between my blade and the fence of the table saw until it was tight, then back it off just a little bit until I felt like I had enough wiggle room for the battery. Then I'd lock the fence in place, rip down 2 strips for the 2 sections for each battery at 12 inches in length, and then I'd mark them with the battery type so I wouldn't lose track of which piece was which. Once all of the dividers and spacers have been cut, you can lay out everything on the table and figure out how everything is going to fit together and the overall width. You'll notice that the spacers for the D batteries I've cut out of MDF, and they're actually a little bit long. This is fine because these are actually just temporary. They won't be put into the final battery station. I'm just using them here as spacers to set the width of that D battery section. So arranged from left to right, we've got D, C, AA, AAA 9 volt, and then again D, C, AA, AAA 9 volt. We'll have a regular battery section on the left and a rechargeable section on the right. At this point, you can measure this to get the overall width, and we'll use that width to determine the sizes of the next few pieces. Now with some 1/2 inch plywood, we'll use that overall width to cut down the back panel, and then a small base plate of the same width to go underneath all of the compartments. Now we just need to give everything a good sanding to take off any sharp edges that might get in the way or make it look bad. And we can start our glue up by taking the side pieces and gluing and clamping them into place on the left and right side of our back panel. And just let that set up before we move on. Now since the D battery sections won't have any spacers glued into them, we don't need to put glue across the entire back here. So I've measured and marked out the area that will need glue, and we'll fill that in with some wood glue and spread it out flat with just a piece of scrap wood here. From here we can start gluing up all of the spacers and dividers for the right section here. making sure to put some glue on the sides of all of our spacers to give some extra strength around those thin divider pieces. You'll also see that I've used a straight piece of metal here to align all of the pieces along the bottom edge. This works pretty well, except I probably should have used my base plate piece instead, and I'll explain why in just a minute. Now, as you can see, I had a lot of glue squeeze out, and I let it set up a little while and scraped out as much as I could. I certainly could have done a better job of it, but since this will ultimately be painted, I didn't worry about it too much. Now, to glue up the left side, we'll start with our D battery spacers, and you can see I've wrapped them up in blue tape just to prevent the glue from sticking to them. And I mark out the area to get glued with pencil lines, fill it in with some wood glue, and again spread it out with that piece of scrap wood to get a nice even coverage. And at this point we can just go ahead with the same glue up process as before. Start by laying out the D battery spacer on one side and adding the dividers and spacers one after another after that. I'd laid these out on my workbench beforehand to make sure I got them in the right order so I didn't screw it up during the glue up. And assuming everything is a tight enough fit, that last D battery spacer will give you a little bit of side-to-side clamping pressure on all your pieces. I added some steel weights across all the front pieces to help the glue up and keep them all flush with each other. After the glue set up a bit, I could pop out the D battery spacers and let the glue set up a bit longer. So I ran into just a little issue here. When I put them in, I lined them up across the bottom here, and that's nice and straight. There's no wiggle to that, but up at this level, there's a little bit of wiggle there that's not straight across. And now that I've got my bottom piece cut, once I put it up here, it wobbles back and forth. So it's not sitting on there nice and flat and straight. So, in retrospect, I should have put this on first. But, what? Well, that's crazy. Alright, so it's not straight. But out of sheer luck, the piece that I just cut has a really slight bow to it. It actually kind of fits on there really well. Huh. Okay, I was about to sand these down to make them straight, but you know what? I might just run with that. But if you decide to make this, put your bottom piece on first so you can register everything up against it. I think I just got lucky here. Now the bottom shelf is pretty simple construction. I just cut two pieces to that full width of the battery station and sized them big enough to fit my battery charger. And then two side pieces. Then we just glue up those four pieces and glue them to the back panel. Once all the glue is set up, we can flip the entire unit over and add some extra strength to all these glue joints by marking out the center lines of all of the half-inch boards that are on the front, pre-drilling them, countersinking them, and finally securing them in place with wood screws. Now the battery station will get pretty heavy once it's fully loaded with batteries and a charger and everything else. So we want to make sure we have strong hardware for hanging this on the wall. You can certainly screw it into the wall with anchors, but I prefer to use these keyhole fasteners. We just have to cut out a small pocket behind each one to leave room for the screw heads, and then pre-drill the mounting holes for screws. Now there are a few gaps in between the pieces and some voids in the plywood, but those were easily fixed with a little wood filler and some help from my son. We gave everything a good sanding. Sprayed everything down with a coat of primer. And got in all the nooks and crannies with some sandpaper to smooth out the rough spots from the primer. and gave everything a couple coats of paint. Now for the side rails for the window, we use this 1/2 inch by 3/4 inch aluminum angle. Cuts easily on any woodworking saw, and then you can clean up the edges with sandpaper. So we cut that a little bit extra long, and then marked out a small tab to remove on the 3/4 inch side on each piece. At first my instinct was to go to the bandsaw to cut this out, which worked. However, I realized that if I thought about it like cutting a rabbit joint on the end of the piece, I could move over to the table saw and just cut out that notch a lot easier and cleaner than on the bandsaw. We just take a couple passes over the blade to remove enough material. And we end up with a much nicer, cleaner cut. Then that 1/2 inch tab can be bent over at 90 degrees, and that tab is what will hold our window in place, or at least keep it from falling down. Now after the tabs are bent, I can then come back and cut those 2 aluminum rails down to their final length. The front window is made from a thin sheet of plexiglass, and it's cut to the same size as the front of the battery compartments, but slightly narrower so it has some room to slide up and down. Now the front window needs a little bit of room to slide up and down, so we want to make sure that these side rails don't get too tight. So to get the proper spacing between the rails and the window, we'll put the window down first, add a few playing cards, here I stacked up 2 in each corner, and then just set the aluminum rails in place. Now I've already drilled and countersunk a few holes on each side rail, so now that they're set in place, I can mark the holes, drill them out, and screw the rails in with some 1/2 inch wood screws. Once the side rails are secure, I can remove the playing cards, and the window can slide easily in and out of the rails. And then the only thing left is to flip around to the back and attach those keyhole fasteners that we marked out earlier. Now when I designed this battery station, I already had a place in mind, the end of this cabinet in our basement. And since I was mounting this into a 3/4 inch thick piece of wood, I didn't have to worry too much about wall anchors, so I put a couple wood screws into the cabinet here and hung the battery station from those. When I hung up the battery station, I wanted to make sure it was tipped backwards slightly so that the batteries didn't have a tendency to slide out the front when I was loading them. So I took a couple of these rubber cabinet door bumpers, the peel and stick kind, and I put them on the bottom corners of the battery station to make sure that the whole thing would be tipped back slightly. Now with the slide out window on the front, it's actually pretty easy to load this thing. Now you can certainly drop the batteries in from the top, but they don't always land flat on their side. Sometimes they land upright, sometimes they flip around, but I found it pretty easy to just lift up the window and insert the batteries from the front. Now on the shelf here, I've got enough room for the battery charger to sit, so I can keep it there, keep it plugged in 24/7, and in the shelf compartment below I can store my extra batteries, my watch batteries, my battery tester, and any other battery-related stuff that we might need to store there over time. So I hope you enjoyed this project as much as I did. Hopefully it inspires you to tackle an organization project of your own, whether it be batteries or anything else. Thanks for taking the time to watch, and I'll see you next time.